Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our first annual Farm Transition Appreciation Day. Our team here at Farm Life is happy to partner with Farm Management Canada and bring our family farms from across Canada some ideas on how to get your succession and estate plans to the finish line. My name is Darrell Wade. I'm the founder of Farm Life Financial Planning Group, where we focus our time on helping farm families have those courageous conversations about the future of their family farm business. I was born the youngest of four on a family farm just east of Toronto. My father, like so many others, would find it challenging to communicate his intentions, and unfortunately didn't find the time to have a clear plan in place for his life's work. His success came to an end when he passed away from complications of a routine colonoscopy just at the age of 65. He left us in shock, unprepared, and facing the consequences of the what-ifs in life. It would start just the next day when we sat around the kitchen table, arguing about how we wanted to be buried, or was it cremated? This was the beginning of many surprises and unknown plans of how to move forward. It was clear that there was no plan for succession, and decisions were made that may not have been in the best interest of the continuity of the farm business. And I'd be then faced with making a decision to restart my career. I decided to start to pursue a new education and then made a plan to begin a career in the financial services industry. It has now been over 20 years that I've been helping serve farm families with purpose and passion to ensure they can avoid the mistakes that my family made with their own farm legacy plans. I want to recognize that each of our farm transition journeys are unique and take important, courageous steps in moving farm families towards the finish line. In other words, there is no cookie cutter for this, there's no templates, and it should be created with you and your family. It needs to align with your vision and values for success. This is not supposed to be easy, or everyone would have it done, and as we know, that's not the case. I invite you to use the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen to send your questions to me throughout the presentation. I'll do my best to answer them at the end. So recognizing that each family and farm business situation is unique, we still need to have a clear process on how to take families through that and help them guide them through that journey of co-creating a plan for their farm. We heard earlier today from Kim Seegers-Robinson talking about how to align a family's vision for success, how to recognize differences, and also address possible situations for conflict. Then we heard from one of our associates, Bernie Cottenberg, who helped us understand the importance of clarifying and quantifying the numbers. How do we treat sweat equity on the farm? How do we clarify for mom and dad what they need to maintain their lifestyle and redeem from what is usually their largest asset, the farm? Then we heard from our tax planning team of Earl Pollock and Matt Holmes. They also discussed the options available for the Hunter family and when they needed ideas on how to build a fair transition plan. And lastly today, I will round out how to identify some roadblocks and some unique or creative ways in establishing fair versus equal in your estate plans, and how the Hunter family had to overcome some of their roadblocks as we started to create a roadmap to success. But before I begin, I also want you to understand that it may be the last part of the process here in the presentation, but all of these parts of our process need to be addressed, and sometimes in different order or simultaneously. When I met with the Hunter family, it was clear that defining the fair versus equal methodology, if you will, would be addressed sooner rather than later in order for this family to feel good about choosing the best path forward with transition options. What is estate planning? I think it means something different to everyone. And for some, it's the art of dying neatly. And for others, it's about less hands touching their money the better, minimizing tax, probate, and other potential liabilities. I feel that with farm estate planning, it's really about taking stock of the assets that we've accumulated in our lifetime and try to provide some direction for those assets to the next generation or possibly a charity of your choice, but not to leave that choice up to someone else. We work with farm families that have generations of work before them, and they consider themselves sometimes stewards of the land and have a multi-generational view of succession for their farm, but often still need help in articulating that vision or ensuring that their plans align with current tax and estate planning rules and implications. The other important piece that they look to us for is to build and maintain that governance of the family farm business. I'm not a lawyer. This is not a legal presentation. I'm going to talk about real family issues and real strategies that have worked for some of our clients. But first, let's take a minute to understand what some of the roadblocks are that hold families up from moving forward. For some, it's time. We never talk about it. It's also not easy for some people to even start to have a discussion about their mortality. It's not easy to share your ideas with your own family. We don't want to share our financials, our personal values, or we feel we have a different idea of how to move forward. Maybe it's a charity that's important to one of our spouses, but not both. Maybe what is fair in dad's eyes is not always equal in mother's, because being equal is not always fair. In farming, it's different. We need to take into account families' values, their vision, and possibly what has already been deemed as support to some of the non-farming children. There's always a fear of starting this work and with who can help us. We don't want to have arguments. We want to continue to have Sunday dinner together, and there's nothing easier than not talking about it. There'll be an expensive cost to this. I've gone back and forth between different professionals, lawyers, accountants, and I've gotten different opinions, but not always the same, or they don't align. As Kim had explained earlier this morning, the Hunter family, when we first did the discoveries, had no bubbling issues. But that's almost the same with every family until we get into it. Just to revisit, the Hunter family is a farm family that has both a dairy and a cash crop business. They have 500 acres owned and 500 acres rented. They have approximately 120 head of cattle. Matriarch Mary, who still has the majority of the farm ownership from her late husband, who just passed away a few years earlier. Mary's approaching the age of 80, has a lot of concerns, but also wants to start to let go and knowing that there's some advantages today to having this work done. And her farming son, Bruce, and wife, Susan, now have their children also with an appetite to understand what the path for the future looks like. Their farm son, Matthew, and wife, Sarah, have 2 children. Maggie, who currently works on a farm close by, but not on the family farm. And then son, Mark, who's been there right out of high school, along with his wife, Grace, expecting their first child. I think have an appetite for some clarity of what this is going to look now that there's 3 generations involved. But the nice thing to know is their family values and goals align. And those family values and goals really are to have some type of a legacy plan for the farm and the business, to make sure that the exiting generations have financial security. And of course, with the work that we do, we want to make sure that at all times we remain harmonious as a family as we move forward. It became apparent that there was no sense of entitlement with the children, but rather, like most, curiosity from those that were not connected with the farm on a daily basis. What is my brother and sister going to get from this? Asked non-farming son Matthew. He almost defended his younger brother, saying, I don't think it's fair if Maggie expects a piece of the business after years of dedication, hard work, and loyalty of my brother's contributions. Matthew didn't expect to get anything, especially today. And like many non-farming kids, he wanted to make sure that his parents, Bruce and Susan, would be financially secure and possibly have a choice to spend some of their time off farm and maybe reinvent themselves to another chapter of their life. If there was a substantial gift, he mentioned, of farmland and quota values are significant, but I also want to be recognized that no one would ever see a lot of money, but rather hard work, risk, and complete dedication from my brother. I chose the path that I have because I didn't want to be tied down to the farm every day like they do. I would expect that there's anything left over at the end in my parents' estate that I may be considered in some way. He was also very, I think, clear to me that his parents had provided him with some opportunity. They helped me pay for my education. They actually helped me with my down payment on my first home and even contributed to our wedding, Matthew stated. As I mentioned, a lot of times when we begin to have these conversations, of fair versus equal, it starts early in the process. But imagine not knowing what you need from your assets. As parents, how would you ever let go? You'd want to hold on to everything forever. But because members of our team, like Bernie, helped to clarify Mary's financial needs and resources, as well as Bruce and Susan's lifestyle income plan, we created it with purpose and clarity, giving everyone the confidence to make good, meaningful decisions and have good discussions as we move forward about what is best for everyone. What's important when we start to have these conversations around fair versus equal is to really understand what the family's values are. As we know with most, it's always hard work or creating an opportunity for everyone. Often it's about fairness rather than equality. What does the past succession look like from grandparents to the current ownership generation? In other words, how did your parents get the farm? Each family has to be a part of creating this. Otherwise, I think we're setting our families and our farms up for failure. I don't think it should be a surprise, and I believe that everyone should be aware of what mom and dad's plans are for creating fairness or equality and how their estate or farm assets will eventually be distributed. So we ask questions to the parents: is anyone getting cash today? And have you helped your children out in other ways, such as I mentioned earlier with education, homes, possibly with weddings? We get back to what does fair mean to everyone. So let's start to quantify it. And often we're trying to sort out who should get what or where or what assets should go where, but should we involve our children first and give them a voice in the process? It doesn't mean that they get a vote. Well, with the Hunter family, we had to first consider, what do we have available for non-farming assets to lead to our non-farming children? So do we have other assets, investments, et cetera, that have been saved along the way? Well, this is as unique as each family and every farm situation that we're a part of. And first, take inventory, as I said, of what available resources that you have. Will there be investments left over at the end? If you have a detailed lifestyle income plan or a financial planner that can help you with that, generally they can make some assumptions as to what should be left over based on inflation rates, mortality, and investment returns. Yes, there are a lot of assumptions that go into that planning work, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. However, some of the big concerns today obviously are inflation, health changes, and lifestyle needs. But with the Hunter family, they had that support, and then we ended up knowing exactly what they needed, that there was not going to be enough farming assets to lead to the residue estate, so that we had to be somewhat creative. So then we started to ask questions of, can we create a promissory note around some of these values that could be paid out to the non-farming children? If it's shares of the corporation, could we leave shares to the estate to be redeemed or exchanged at the estate level? Again, to create money when it's needed most for the non-farming children. So in considering these alternatives, essentially, we're looking at what are the methods that are available to us as a family in our unique situation to create some type of fairness. Essentially, there only are 4 ways. You could save for it. You could borrow for that at some point. You could sell something, but that's not usually an option. And then lastly, you could insure the obligation to the estate. And because this is somewhat unique to most families, we're going to explore this in a little bit more detail. So once a family has decided on what that amount is that they're going to leave to the non-farming children, then it's easy enough for us or our financial planning team to start to quantify the different methods in which to do that. But first, just to touch on the traditional model, meaning most families would say to me, you know what, we're going to take extra money, or we're going to take additional surplus funds from the farm, because obviously that is our asset, and then we're going to resave those funds into an investment. Even though we don't know a lot about investing or we're not that comfortable with it, we think that might be the best plan. But the problem with that is that obviously when we take extra income out of the farm, whether it's in the form of a salary or dividends, it becomes taxable. Even if we ask the farming successor to fund this, it's the same thing. That money being exchanged from farming son to parents usually has to come out of some type of redemption of dividends or salary, again, being taxed. And like I said, when mom and dad save that surplus funds every year on an annual basis, if it does have success and grows, it is obviously taxed again, either as interest, capital gains, or dividends. Then eventually when we disperse those funds to the next generation at the end, there potentially could be tax, probate, or other liabilities. So it doesn't become that efficient of a model. Again, thinking about how many hands or times that tax could actually touch our money. So we try to think of something that's more efficient. It really is just trying to understand, again, is there a way that we can create this fairness or this responsibility for the asset that generates the cash flow to actually produce a responsibility, not only fund mom and dad's lifestyle needs, but also to potentially fund the non-farming kids' equalization or fairness. A lot more efficient, a lot less hands touching your money, and generally when it comes out at the end, it becomes a tax-free benefit. So let's explore this in a little bit of detail. First of all, as I mentioned, with financial planning, there's always assumptions. There's assumptions with how long we'll live, how long, or for in this example, we'll look first at saving for it. The first assumption is, will we have enough time? If mom and dad are 65 or 70, will we have 20, 15, or 20 or 25 years to save enough money before our non-farming kids have to be paid out via the estate? So we're going to use an average return today of 5% and the highest tax rate. We also are going to look at ways that we can borrow for it. And again, interest rates today may be very low, but we're trying to, again, keep things consistent. So we'll use a loan rate of 5%. The third thing we're going to look at is selling an asset. And obviously, the tax rate on that asset could be as modest as 26%. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the average of 5 of the top carriers in Canada that provide permanent insurance. And again, this is something that our financial planning team of actuaries and underwriters puts together and customizes on each unique situation. It's going to be hard to see these numbers, folks, because it is a spreadsheet. But with the Hunter family, what they asked us to do is, they came up with a number. And again, looking at those, the financial gift, if you will, or the amount of equity that's going to be left in the farm and the cash flow of the farm, they did decide that it would be the number they were going to shoot for was to provide an estate number of $1 million. So then again, our team can get very granular and detailed to say what's ultimately the most efficient way to do this. So to save for it, again, you would, the very bottom row, you'll notice the numbers. And in order to save for it, you'd have to basically $633,000 to fund that with the effects of compounding time and interest at 5%. It's actually a pretty good alternative. Again, we only just got to hope that we have enough time to save that money. Secondly, we look at selling an asset. And of course, with the effects of tax, we'd have to sell an asset worth about $1,365,000 to net $1 million. The third option would be to borrow for it. And again, with a modest rate of return of 5% and to fund it over a 20-year period once mom and dad passed, that farming son would look at roughly about $1.5 million of total payout to provide $1 million of a benefit. And the last way, and obviously you'll see it's the most efficient way, given the mom and dad are both healthy, we would actually take out a last to pass type plan, meaning we don't need insurance if just mom died or just dad. It would be on the last passing of both individuals, and it would pay out a tax-free benefit to the non-farming children. And that would cost them $445,000 to create $1 million of tax-free benefit. The couple things to note is that benefit actually starts out day one of the $1 million, and it actually will grow to, I believe it is over $1.2 million. So that is, that's also that $1 million keeping pace with inflation, if you will. So it's $1 million in today's dollars, and that mom and dad's mortality, it grows into approximately $1.2 million. But the cost to fund that is significantly less than any other alternative. Again, it's about 45 cents on the dollar. Again, I guess the point I'll make here is each family is unique. Insurance is not always the alternative or the solution, doesn't fit everyone or every situation. But this family came to us and asked us, what do other families do when they have to create money for a time down the road when it needs to be needed? And Sometimes we see that if there's a tax liability or to prevent risk, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, insurance can be an option. I guess my advice would be that, again, each situation is unique, and that would be something that would be have to be looked at in your own unique circumstances. So when it came to the Hunter family, we actually determined that fairness plan now. So it's good to be consistent, and it's good to be clear. So because of the work that Matt and Earl had done and helped the family get to a place with the transition options, it made them a lot more confident on how to create that family fairness plan, if you will. So they knew exactly what they were trying to shoot for. As we talked about, some of the assets were going to have some certainty and be moved now. We did the freeze and started to bring Mark into ownership. So it only made sense to start to create some certainty around what the estate level would look like. As I mentioned, they did transfer some assets to the children now. Maggie actually got brought into title with some joint ownership with Mary's home, and that gave everyone some certainty there as well. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about how we build some clarity and certainty around some agreements for them. And then we determined what the life insurance amount would be, and we created that fairness and equality plan. I think the most important part here is that we took the time to communicate that plan to the entire family, so no one was going to move forward without, I guess, a clear expectation, and there'd be no surprises down the road. Well, the what-ifs. As most have in the back of their minds, I constantly ask my clients about how they're feeling, what's keeping you up at night. It's important for the team of professionals that you work with to understand where your concerns are and help bring clarity or certainty so how you can move forward with confidence. Sometimes we make suggestions based on what we see or feel from the family. It's not always the best for the family farm business when we start to build governance, but it is important that we start to build, I think, some certainty for one generation that's exiting the business, and obviously for the next generation starting to come into the business. So some of the what-ifs for the Hunter family were, what if the farm was sold? What if there's a potential marriage breakdown? We put all this faith and trust on this plan into Mark's hands, but what if something happened to Mark early, whether it was a death or a disability? And again, what if Mark's spouse had to sell farm assets to help their family survive? And obviously there's always some what-ifs around the supply managed business today as well. So what we did is we started to talk about agreements, how agreements could bring some certainty and some clarity to that family. And as I mentioned earlier, for some it's about a clear exit on how to get out of the business, how one generation gets into the business, and then build that governance on how do we maintain or move forward as business or stakeholders together. So to go back and we look at those what-ifs, and now we start to say, how can we protect the farm? So in the event of spouses not being married yet, of a non-marriage yet to that next generation, we could look at gifting documents. Gifting documents allow for a layer of protection that any assets that are gifted stay out of the Family Law Act. If it is pre-marriage, we could look at prenuptial agreements, if that's something that's comfortable for some families to put on the table. We can also look at land use agreements. So if we are going to leave specific pieces of land to non-farming children, we want to make sure they not only have a usage agreement for the ones that are going to farm that land, but also a first right of refusal if that farmland ever has to be sold or transferred back to the farming son or daughter. And also, obviously, another layer of protection could be a look-back clause in the case of the farmland ever had to be sold. Those funds would come back into what I call the family bucket to be dispersed again. And of course, some type of a risk management plan to identify those areas of weakness or areas the family stakeholders are exposed for risk, whether it's in a premature death or disability. And again, last but not least is communicating. I think it's important that everyone knows what everyone else's what-ifs are, and that we're communicating or working through and to build consensus on what agreements are going to work to allow everybody that confidence to move forward. With the Hunters, there are specific agreements. It really was a gifting declaration, which again allowed Mary to transfer to Bruce to the extent of gifts. Again, that would protect to that extent the Family Law Act. There was a share exchange agreement put in place where the share values were frozen, and now those preferred shares can be redeemed over the exiting generation's lifetime. It's also important in that share exchange agreement that there could possibly be a minimum and a maximum that can be redeemed each year. That minimum would protect Bruce and Susan, their lifestyle needs, to say, you know, this is the minimum that they need each year or each month to maintain a lifestyle. And the maximum would actually protect the farm to make sure that, you know, Bruce and Susan can come knocking saying that we needed a couple $100,000 in one year, because that could potentially cripple the long-term sustainability or viability of the farm business. We also had purchase and sale agreements put in place to establish the amount of the specific price and particular assets that we were transferring. There was a shareholders agreement, and it was amended to establish new governance on how they're going to make decisions as a stakeholder group, potentially on anything on decisions on over a certain amount on purchases of large pieces of equipment, land, and ultimately, again, governance on how they're going to move forward together as a group. There was a life interest put in place on Mary's home because she wanted to add Maggie to title. And again, this protects Mary to make sure that she always has, of course, an interest in that home until she decides not to, or until she passes away. And lastly is wills. We want to make sure both personal and corporate or dual wills are put in place or updated to reflect all the changes of the planning that we've done over the last number of months and years. So just some best practices to kind of round this out with this afternoon. And so I think everyone can understand, and we're big believers to empower families to start these conversations. This is, like I said, sometimes 2 or 3 generations, if not more, of work put into this. So we want to make sure that we can start those conversations and have those conversations in a safe place with people that you guys feel safe with as well to share. Not always our internal advisors, so we get asked to come in because we are the third party, unbiased, and safe to talk or to have those conversations with. Also to create that inclusive environment, like I said earlier, to share those stories and challenges of how did one generation get the farm. It really starts to demystify, I think, for the ones that have that appetite and are very curious on coming into the business today. I think these stories need to be shared. And again, these discussions also lead to aligning that vision for the future and to find alignment in our goals. We may have a different idea on how to get there, but it's really important that our initial goals and our vision for success aligns. We want to involve that next generation early. And as I say, it's a good time to start to identify opportunities, possibly for coaching or training for the next generation. And it could be as simple as identifying those milestones that need to be created, whether it's a lack of skills, knowledge in certain areas, but then there's clear expectations on how we can reach those and move forward together as a family. And in the world of specialization today, I think it's important to understand that not everyone on your team can be everything that's needed in this process. And quite often we're either the quarterbacks or we bring a team of experts to the family farm. I believe the best thing that you can do to protect your legacy is to be a part of planning what it will be. Not leaving those decisions up to someone else. As a lot of you would know, we are a member benefit provider for the OFA, and we do offer our Ontario Federation of Agriculture members a 10% discount on our succession planning fees. Along with that, as a complimentary consultation anytime. And when they're available, we have access to our regional workshops, of course. So I thank you for tuning in today and listening to our creative ways on how to get your plans to the finish line. I know there was a lot of stuff that we went through, and if by any means you need to revisit this presentation or some of the great things we put into our transition toolkit, please visit farmtransitionguide.ca. And now we're going to just pause and take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really insightful presentation. I know that this was part of a series of following the case study of the hunters that Farm Life Financial did over the course of today. So it's really nice to see how that story transpires. Darrell, I'm wondering if, I know we
Yeah.
were having some technical difficulties before. Were we able to get video?
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to work, Chandra. But I can see you and I can see the questions popping up. So I'll try my best to answer them.
Okay.
I'll try this one more time here. But hopefully everybody can still hear me okay.
I certainly can, so I think we're good for audio.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this isn't some type of
confirmation.
excuse for you guys not to see me, of course, because I was prepared for the video. But yeah, thanks everybody for first of all for tuning in, and obviously for our first opportunity for a Farm Transition Appreciation Day. And I think this has been a great success so far, and it looks like we had a great attendance. And I've got a number of questions coming at me, so I'll start with this one. It says, Darrell, do you find that most farms are in a good financial position to transfer the farm, or do they need more work around, at the end to ensure that transition is financially feasible? So again, I'll try to address everything, but it's the one thing I will say is that there's no, don't two farms or two families the same. In the work that we do, we see a lot of variation when it comes to the financial strength of different farms, and it would be, it's not fair to generalize. I mean, obviously, a lot of the supply managed farm families that we work with are, multi-generational, meaning it's a second, third, or sometimes even a fourth generation family farm. And they have significant strength on the balance sheet. And they're in a position quite often, as both Bernie and I have mentioned, that they really just need to understand their numbers. What does the exiting generation need to actually maintain a lifestyle that they deserve? And as I had said today, it's really hard for people to make good, confident, and clear decisions if you don't know your numbers. So there were some great questions for Bernie's financial piece as well. We start with an exercise with families, just actually, and I try not to use the budget word, because then people think I'm trying to obviously put them on some type of a financial diet, and I'm not. I think it's just important that we understand where we spend our money in a world of, I call it ideal. What would you do with your time? Who would you spend your money and your time with? And then you start to think about, and it may be a little bit different in this current climate. Do you want to travel? Do you want to start, I have a family just worked locally here, and they have a real passion for the theater, and they actually do some work in the theater themselves. So it's kind of like their next chapter thing. But so everybody's lifestyle is different. But if we don't start to map that out, then we'll never understand what that clarity is going to look like. So the first exercise is, in an ideal world, if you could spend your time doing all these things you want to do, traveling or reinventing yourself, what would it look like? And then we use as we talked about earlier, we do use inflation, and we try to be, I would say, more than conservative, meaning we use high inflation rates, low return rates, and a lot of what ifs, as we've talked about today, so that we can say in a worst case scenario, if mom and dad do live to 120 years of age, which is a great thing to shoot for, but it might not be realistic, we've actually mapped out, here's what they could use for assets or for a lifestyle need. And then when we take this back into this question, then we're really clear on, if we've got a 10 or a 15 or 20 million, it doesn't really matter, because the numbers are all relevant per family and per farm. But then we know, here's what we need to extract from that value over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we can have a lot more purposeful or meaningful discussions around the kitchen table to say, here's our asset values, here's what we need from them. And at the end of the day, do we really need to extract more than what we actually can? And working with our tax planning team, there's a limit to what you can extract tax-free, as we all know. And there's no sense in lining the pockets of Revenue Canada, because we would rather see some of that money go back to our own family members. So, this question's a great one, but I do think that every family has to know their numbers, but also have to have probably some type of a cash flow projection to say, if we redeemed at this rate for this length of time, how does it affect the long-term viability of our family farm? And one thing that we see, I think, on a pretty consistent basis today, or that I get, whether it's the phone calls or just the curious people, it's a bit of a paradox. You've got one generation trying to get into this business and grow, and then you've got another generation that's actually trying to get out and actually harvest, if you will. And so that if you're trying to do both at the same time, if you don't know your numbers well, there's going to be continuous, I think, friction or very difficult conversations around how do we satisfy both the entering and exiting generation. But so So my answer to that is know your numbers, take the time to actually to involve good professionals that can either help you with at the beginning, the financial side of it, the lifestyle planning, or the exiting part, meaning the cash flow of the business. The next question I have here is, says, what percentage of farms would you encounter that actually know their numbers? Are there characteristics of those who do or do not? Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard again to generalize, but I would say that more than ever, I see that people have their hand on the pulse of the business, which is really important. And I think that more than ever, they know their numbers because there's obviously a great depth of financial planning professionals out there that we have access to. And I think that's my point, is that we can't leave it up to just one professional. You can't leave it all up to your accountant, whether it's your financial planners or your team of professionals. You really got to understand both sides of it, meaning the cash flow of the business and the personal needs of each stakeholder. I'm just going to flip. The next question is, how long does the succession planning process take? And I'm only laughing because, again, I think this is not a one-size-fits-all answer. It really does come back to probably the complexity of the actual farm operation. How many stakeholders, how big is the operation? Because I know that the more voices that we have involved in this process, sometimes the longer it can take. And as you all know, I'm a big believer in hearing everyone's voice at the beginning, because I think that those perspectives either add or lend to our ability to see a path forward. And if we don't, like I said, then we're actually setting ourselves up for failure, because then we're going to find a surprise 10, 20 years down the road that may not align with our overall vision. But the process, the planning process itself, and I think Bernie might have answered this quite well. It is relevant to each family and farm, but I would say an average of 18 months is kind of where we see most families that are what I would say completely engaged. And engaged means that they're coming to the table too. And it's in times like this that can actually, do a Zoom meeting when we can't be present. As you know, most of the work we do is around a kitchen table, because it's that personable and it's that important that we all feel emotion. But there's been some that have actually taken 3, 4, and even 5 years for families to get to the finish line. But I would say most of that is just stuff that's out of our control, and that could be conflict, or it could be just timing, right? There's one that we're close on right now, but it's been a 3-year plan because that's what the parents wanted. They wanted to actually set up a transition for the next generation to come into the business management piece first. And then ultimately, we're just starting to look at transferring the ownership. But again, a really good question. Next one isn't anonymous. It's from Kathy. And she's asking, what do our services cost? And again, I don't want to be too general in answering all these questions, but it's actually really relevant to size and complexity. If we're dealing with a small family farm with one successor and no non-farming kids, and discovery is pretty brief, but again, we want to touch on all those aspects. We take a retainer, and then we work through each of those phases as per the family's actual mandate for us. So some people don't need a financial planner. They work with their own financial planner. So then that financial planning fee that would come out of that. Our retainer is $5,000, and we think that we're probably positioned as one of the more competitive, I guess, players in this market. And again, you guys heard from Matt Holmes today, who's a big part of our team, and he works as an external tax advisor, but he gives great value. So a lot of our work, we like to think that we're providing value, meaning it could be saving a family $50,000 or $100,000 in tax, and again, those succession planning fees could be $15,000 or $20,000. So we like to think that we're adding value at every point of the process. And by all means, if you want a specific cost for your own family and farm, and that's one of those things that we would be happy to talk about on a private consultation. On a brief call, I can get an idea of, again, the number of stakeholders and what each family wants from us as far as guiding them down this path. But hopefully that answers your question. Wow, the next one is from anonymous, but it's great. It's I struggle with the fair versus equal in our situation. We rolled the farm to our 3 children, who were all over 50s, just 6 years ago. And at that time, none of our children were farming, but we're all made equal shareholders. Now, one of them has decided to farm for a few years before retiring. So what is fair and equal now? Should the non-farming children be giving their shares to the farming child? Well, that's a really, again, I would say, very specific situation for you and your family to work through. It's, and I think, this really speaks to the process that we take people through, and giving everyone a voice at the beginning would maybe have helped understand, I think, what that long-term vision for success would have meant for that child that's now trying to get out. Hopefully you've built good agreements within your family, shareholders agreements, because it sounds like you're incorporated. So my suggestion again, would be that non-farming child giving up their shares to a farming child would fit. And I guess the question would be is, did you build that in with some certainty around price or methodology, and how you would move through this piece of the agreement when you got to this stage? And if you haven't, again, I would be happy to either help and point you in the right direction with I do have a great network of legal advisors all across Ontario that have helped with specific family concerns like this, meaning how do we kind of almost get out of something we've already built? But that is a pretty specific question. And I guess for me to give a good answer, I'd want to see the agreements, and I want to know a little bit more about the structure, but I hope you can get the answers you need. And if not, reach out to me.
I was going to say, Darrell, just to jump in really quickly, perhaps it's not a bad idea for you to, if you're comfortable doing so, putting your email address or a URL for Farm Life Financial. So that way, if somebody actually, if somebody does feel like they could get more, want to know more, and something a little bit more personalized, then it's probably a good idea to just put that out there and make the connections that we want to make, because that is what we're here to do today.
Live. So I'll try my best to do that while I'm trying to read the questions and answer them too. And I think I will. I'll finish off too by just telling everybody again, we're available at farmlifefinancial.ca. My personal email is Darrell, Darrell @farmlifefinancial.ca. And you can always reach me by phone too, which is 705-872-8716.
Great.
I got lots of questions rolling in here. I'll try my best to answer some more of them with, I think we've got about 5 or 10 minutes, but I think I'm going to take all 3 of these and put them into one. There's one here about asking about making a will. Why do we need 2 of them? And then when is the best timing to have wills redone? So again, given that I'm not a lawyer, but I have been through a lot of these over the years myself as well. I guess the answer is, I'll answer the first one. You make a will when you have, for the purpose of giving direction to your assets specifically. And you need 2 of them when you have a family farm corporation. The purpose or reason behind having 2 of them, that dual will, or the corporate will, if you will, it will allow those corporate shares to bypass probate and basically deal with your farm corporation separately. And the last one is the last part of that would be, when is the best time to have them redone? Well, I certainly wouldn't want people to not or to pause and wait until they have complete clarity. I know a lot of times when we start this process with families, it's one of their first questions, or in a discovery, they ask a question, they realize that, oh no, I should have had these dual wills in place because I have a farm corp. I think time is always of the essence, meaning you can never pick a bad time. But I also think that most of the time I've updated or redone a will, it's when there's been a substantial change in our life. Whether we've added another child to our mix, whether we've got clarity on where our assets are going to go. But again, never, I don't think, a bad time to reach out to your lawyer to ask for some clarity on, is this a good situation for us to update our wills? This next one actually talks a little bit around who creates the shareholders agreement. And I would say that everyone should be involved, meaning your team of professionals. And definitely one of the things I think that a lot of professionals today, we want to make sure that it's not a template pulled off a shelf, that someone else has used that cookie cutter for another family. We want to be a part of it. And as I mentioned earlier, best practice is to be inclusive and participatory in all of this process. So we like to be the ones that help encourage families to have these conversations. A lot of times I will ask the tough questions only to set them up for success. So when the lawyer is a part of the conversation, they're prepared. And we actually have a lot of those conversations at the kitchen table. How are we going to make decisions? And at what point does mom and dad have to be included in a certain, is it a dollar amount? What happens if someone dies? What happens if someone gets disabled? So we can help have those initial conversations. And then I would reach out or collaborate with the client's current lawyer. And I'm a big believer that everybody that's going to be included in that shareholders agreement should also, or does have the opportunity to have independent legal advice, because it's usually a pretty important document, could make up for some pretty important life changes. And again, we want to prevent surprises. So ask all the right questions and be curious as you move through this process. The next one I have here is back to, I think it was asked actually when Matt was presenting, which is what are the estate taxes in Canada? So there is no actual estate taxes in Canada, but there is obviously this thing called probate. Any taxes that would be due on the last death, maybe from any assets that have accumulated with capital gains that haven't been I guess disposed of. But probate is 1.5% of your asset value. And like I said, there are ways to minimize it or to completely get around it. But I would ask my lawyer because for complicated situations, probate isn't always the worst thing either. It's actually just the process of actually making sure your assets are distributed according to your wishes. What else do we have here? I've got, I'm going to save this one for the end. It's the advantages of doing it. So I'll hit it up. It's.
I was going to say now would be a good time to do the one you're saving for last.
Yeah,
Just
so we've got a few more
time
coming in, but I'm going to try to answer this because it sounds like a lot like the one. There's 2 or 3 the same. How do we decide if we move ownership now or later? What's the advantage of actually doing this process now versus through the estate? And this next question after that actually says, what's the advantage of doing it before you die? So this is a pretty common question. We get working with families, and again, that exiting generation or the matriarch and patriarch do hold sometimes all the cards and control. Every situation is different. And as you've heard me speak and a lot of my team, it's about removing concerns, what ifs, and roadblocks. And I think that if we as professional advisors can help a family uncover or move past those roadblocks that keep us, I guess, handcuffed in fear. And again, fears of marriage breakdown or what ifs, and we can put good agreements around it, then I would encourage most families I work with to actually take action and hopefully move their plans to the finish line now. And the reason for that is we know what we can control today. We know what the tax rules are. We know what we can avoid or eliminate when it comes to lifetime capital gains exemptions and capital gains inclusion rates, principal residence exemptions. There's actually a lot of advantages from a tax perspective and a planning perspective that I'm not sure is going to be around forever. This is the only industry in Canada that actually has some of these advantages to pass on or to choose a value anywhere from what we paid for it originally to what it's worth today. And my fear is, especially with the last year we've gone through, and obviously a lot of tax dollars being doled out to help support our other areas of our economy, who is going to pay for that? So my concern is, agriculture or, the ability to transfer farm assets has been a big advantage for a number of years. And my fear is that eventually they're going to look at this and start to either put us on that dartboard, if you will, or at least start to look at different ways that they can have their hands on tax. So my big thing is, like I said earlier, if you have the ability to, you feel good about it, and you're confident you have a successor, ability to move your assets today, I would, again, get lots of great advice, but I would be probably trying to move on that sooner rather than later.
And we're going to have to wrap it up there. Darrell, thank you so much for your thorough presentation, for taking the time to answer questions. I want to thank everyone who's attended today for taking time out of your day to make transition planning a priority, for getting information about what you need to do next and getting some of those questions. I encourage you to use Darrell's contact information if you do have questions that still need to be answered. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted on farmtransitionguide.ca. Thank you for taking part in the first annual Farm Transition Appreciation Day. We hope we'll see you next year, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.